These 5 writers here tonight are a testament to the fact that we are in a deeply dynamic, fertile moment for fiction in this country. Apparently, there's a lot to write about. Who knew? This summer at Politics and Prose, we are looking forward to hosting so many amazing fiction writers, including previous Granta honorees, Mail Malloy and Jonathan Safran Foer. Also, Yuri Herrera, Nick Laird, Catherine Heine, Jesse Chaffee, and Tom Proda, just to name a few. Please check out our website for more information. So when I was growing up, my mother had a copy of the second best of young British novelists on her bookshelf, and I was completely fascinated with it. It's like within these pages were the best words in existence in that year, 1993. I don't think I ever even read it. I was so freaked out by it. These writers, they were like anointed. Will Self, Jeanette Winterston, Kazuo Ishiguro. This special legacy of Granta's curation continues to today in 2017. The newest roster of writers is a deeply diverse group, selected by a jury including Ben Marcus, Kelly Link, A.M. Holmes, and Patrick DeWitt. And the most women are actually ever represented, 12 women to 9 men, which I thought was notable. Tonight we have here with us 5 of the honorees. Jesse Ball creates across many mediums, including poetry and illustration. His acclaimed novels include Someday the Deafness, A Cure for Suicide, How to Set a Fire and Why, and Silence Once Begun. Mark Doten is the author of the novel The Infernal. He teaches at Columbia University and also works as fiction editor at the amazing Soho Press. Rachel B. Glaser is the author of the novel Paulina and Fran, the story collection Pea on Water, and the poetry books Moods and Hairdo, and the recipient of the McSweeney's Amanda Davis Highwire Fiction Award. Katherine Lacey is the author of the novel Nobody Is Ever Missing, which won the 2016 Whiting Award. Her very newest novel, The Answers, will be published by FSG in just a couple of weeks, but thanks to their huge kindness, we actually have early release copies here tonight. They're the only ones in existence, so snatch them up. Sana Krasikov is the author of the novel The Patriots, and her short story collection, One More Year, won the 5 Under 5 award from the National Book Foundation. The authors are all going to read to us before we begin a conversation. We'll begin with Jesse Ball. Please welcome him.
Hello, everyone. Is this loud enough? Yes. So I'm in a bit of a puzzle because the story doesn't really make very much sense unless you read the entirety of it, and that's not really possible. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about it and then read just a couple paragraphs to give you a feel for the prose. So the story is about a young boy who loves beavers and goes to a zoo. There he beholds the beavers, and at some point the beavers escape from the zoo and rip him apart, and underneath him there's a beaver. In fact, he's been a beaver all along, potentially. That might be one interpretation. So, a bit of it. Here the beavers are described. It's a very ratty zoo. There were 4 beavers in the pathetic little river that lay behind the plate glass window. One he called Ganther, one he called Steuben, one Mouselet, one Ganther. He called 2 of them Ganther because he hadn't yet decided which was which, and he thought it was more accurate that way. Still, he knew one Ganther was female. He just couldn't say how it worked, and the beavers moved so unpredictably. It wasn't easy to learn. The beavers were known as being something like fish, but also they could cut down trees. He liked that. Unfortunately, in the place beyond the glass, there were only things that looked like trees, but no real trees. The things that looked like trees had been made to appear to have been cut in half by the beavers, but he knew they hadn't done it. As a salve to the beavers, small pieces of wood were brought to them in a cart, and Steuben would rummage there all day, but could never discover what to do beyond that. The other beavers had no interest. Mouselet was quick, and her nose was cleaner than the others. That was how he knew her. There was a point by the glass that she would approach, but none of the others would. That was another sign. Ganther maybe kicked with his feet while swimming, a bit more than seemed necessary. Steuben rummaged. That was the beavers and their ways. The nurse stood heavily, breathed heavily before the glass. Her heart was beating, and she always felt it was someone else's. That was an illness people died from once, the sensation that your heart was someone else's and the terror of having it beat near you. A heart that is overseen like that starts to flutter, and soon enough it stops, like a fish in a dry pail, smashing its silhouette, losing its nature. He said, "Look, Ganther is coming out of the dam. Look." But the nurse wouldn't look. "Ganther wants to get to the other side because he likes it there better. Now there's Ganther on the other side and also over there, and they want to be together, so they meet in the middle." This was another reason they were both Ganther. They kept meeting in the middle, who knew why. Steuben had something wrong with his head, and when he would rummage, he would sometimes stop and press his head against some sharp part of the wood, as if he was trying to discover what had happened. However long ago it had happened, he was still trying to find it out. It didn't look good for him. Sometimes the beavers would come up and line up near the glass, Mouselet in front, in her spot, either Ganther anywhere behind her, and Steuben off to one side, kind of crouched. They would stand there and stare out, and then it wasn't clear whose side of the glass was whose. The nurse hated it. Perhaps that's enough for today. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to do podium. What are you guys doing? Anyone else doing podium? Okay. It's great to be here. Politics and Prose is one of the great bookstores in the country, and it's such an honor to be here with my fellow readers. I am going to read, so the piece that was in Granta is the first chapter of my next novel, Trump Sky Alpha, and I'm going to read the first page and the last page. And I've read it a few times for Granta events, and it's seemed to be losing energy, so I'm going to try it in a new voice tonight for the first time in News on the March voice. So I don't know if that'll work or not, but that's what you guys get. Trump Sky Alpha, the rigid airship that docked on the roof of the White House and the roof of Trump Tower. A 1,000-foot vessel from the bridge of which Trump delivered streaming YouTube addresses every Wednesday, D.C. to New York, and every Sunday, New York to D.C. The ultra-luxury Zeppelin, Crystal Palace of the Sky, on which the 224 seats, luxury berths in an open-loge style, went for a starting price of $50,000, a figure that jumped with the addition of various ultra-deluxe packages and enhancements. Diamond and Diamond Troika Elite tiers, 4 figures for the 10-star double platinum seafood, certified 8-pound lobsters with Trump embossed on tail and right claw. Wine pairings offered by the animated founding foodie Ben Franklin on touchscreen. Franklin adjusting spectacles and cataloging Trump flights of Trump wine. An exquisite taste of Trump. The feu de cheminée and the blanc de la plus blanc. The final bill after disembarkment running to 20 pages or more of often obscure fees and surcharges, bag fees, and negative weather clemency credits, and per-use charges on the ergonomic loge controls, every seat adjustment noted by the system and itemized. The seats arranged in an oblong spiral that looped the transparent floor 6 times, the entire body of the aircraft constructed from a revolutionary transparent membrane stretched over a skeleton of moth-white aluminum. And then that sentence goes on for 4 or 5 more pages. And a little later, there's a global nuclear crisis that threatens to break out. And in the last page of the story, or of this chapter, Trump responds. And right there, he authorized it. There aboard Trump Sky Alpha on the YouTube live stream, he authorized the big one, the biggest possible response. Lobsters in Bermuda and Turkey and Paris, raising branded claws in silent salute as the flames engulfed them, the last remaining cameras going dark. Helicopters and fighter jets crisscrossing the airspace around and in front of Trump Sky Alpha. U.S. President Donald J. Trump floating at the center of it all. He pressed the automated descent button and the live stream cut out for a final pitch for boutique shopping experiences. Ivanka on video offering bangles and Donald J. Trump's signature neckwear and vacation ownership opportunities. And then back to Trump, full frame at the wheel of Trump Sky Alpha. Another thumbs up to the YouTube live stream audience, to all those watching, those who still had internet, those still alive, and in the Situation Room, among and between all the generals and the members of the deep state, and even now Trump's private security apparatus, a certain humming awareness. A panic that they were watching, just watching, the world end. And wasn't there something they could do? But there were too many different strategies. They were each locked into their own roles, and Trump had already announced it. The big option, right there on the live stream, to the whole world, to all our allies and enemies, and around the world, protocols and contingency plans were going into effect. There just wasn't any time, just no way to wiggle out of the moment, to say sorry, to say stop, to say we fucked up, nothing to be done. Or rather, they could do the big one or just nothing, sit passively, hemmed in by life and by all the possibilities they couldn't quite dream into the real. And they understood that to play was to lose, but not to play was no real option. And so it was the football, it was the gold codes, it was all initiated, it would start very soon. It was all just minutes away, the big event, the one we'd been waiting for the better part of a century. The button got pushed. It was easy, sure, it really was, now that it had happened. And across the Midwest and elsewhere, the missiles took to the sky as President Trump landed softly on the roof of Trump Tower. Not listening for, but hearing nonetheless, somewhere far below, faint and inescapable as his own heartbeat, the oceanic roar of protesters flooding the streets of Manhattan.
I like it better in that voice. It's really exciting. I'm going to read the first part of the story in Granta. Day 4. Loretta dug through dusty boxes until she found the yellow sweatshirt with the faded image of a moose on skis. It still fit. She squeezed into a pair of old leggings and heard the elastic give out. She went through the boxes, remembering each thing, where she'd gotten it and what it had meant, until this became torturous, and she lay on the floor, wanting to die. If the funeral hadn't made her cry, and sleeping in this house didn't make her cry, then it was settled. She was not human. She got up and dumped all the boxes into trash bags. She had until midnight to clear everything out. If she worked hard all day, she could do it. She'd have to fill up the small rental car and make multiple trips to the Salvation Army or the dump or some abandoned place where no one would see what she left. Again, she tried to walk into her mother's room, but it was too terrible. It smelled like a bog. The cat was hiding in there somewhere, Loretta knew. She left the door open and dragged the bags down the creaky stairs. She drank from the kitchen faucet. There was no food in the house, and she decided she wasn't hungry. She lugged the bags out the front door. It was much too hot to be dressed the way she was. She threw the bags into the trash bin and wheeled it to the curb. Across the street, 2 boys punched each other. The younger one was crying. Neither was wearing a shirt. Maybe they could help her load up the car if she made it seem like a game. "Hey," she yelled. She hadn't said anything for days. The older one looked at her in disgust, as if he knew how she'd been living. Loretta gave them the finger. The crying one stopped crying. He had green and purple magic markers scribbled on his chest. "Got a fucking cigarette?" the older one yelled. He had to have been about 11, she thought, sizing up his untied Nikes and the thin gold chain around his neck. She crossed the street without thinking. "I used to babysit you," she lied. "You don't look familiar," the kid said. "You were too young to remember. He was just a baby." She pointed to the younger one, who was jamming a twig into a gummy bear in the grass. "You didn't smoke back then," Loretta told the kid, "and you had this little dolly named Popcorn." Now that she was talking, she couldn't shut up. I didn't have any doll, the kid said. It had these ears, she said, putting her hands to her head. A curtain shook in the window of her mother's apartment. The cat pressed its face against the glass. Can you drive us somewhere? The younger one asked, squinting. He was sort of adorable. It looked like you could tell him anything and he'd believe you. The kid sat in the passenger seat. How old are you? He asked. 36. You married? He asked dubiously. Loretta glanced at the younger one and back, absent-mindedly rolling his window up and down. People don't get married anymore, she said. The kid leaned his head against his seatbelt. Turn here? She could tell he didn't know where they were. He nodded, staring at her sweatshirt. The moose lay on its back in a puff paint snowdrift, its 4 pink skis tangled in the air. Is that blood? He asked, pointing to a stain on her sleeve. Old blood, she said. I'm hungry, said the younger one. She pulled the white Nissan into a narrow spot between 2 black cars. The boys were out before she turned off the engine. She opened the trunk and dug around for her wallet. The boys ran to the pinball machine at the back of Sal's. Loretta watched them gleefully pound away at the buttons. The floor had been retiled, but she was relieved to find the ugly mural still alive. Though parts had been retouched, Loretta could see the ghost of old graffiti under the phony Sicilian sunset. She ordered a pizza, 2 sodas, and a beer from a teenager slouched behind the register. She felt a thrill that she still didn't know the boys' names. Loretta? Giovanni called from the walk-in. He put down his sack of something and jogged towards her. It's Gio. His white t-shirt was splattered with sauce and tucked into black sweatpants. He wore socks and flip-flops and a gold cross in his ear. Giovanni, he said. You know, the Vanni? His face had grown puffy. He hadn't been particularly interesting in high school. Kind of nice, but his friends had been jerks. Gio shifted his weight. Back in the day, he had worn silk shirts and black jeans. He'd had a ponytail. Loretta remembered dissecting the fetal pig, how some of the boys had gotten too into it, and how some of the girls had refused to even watch. I heard about what happened, Gio said. Loretta's face burned. The town was too small. She looked down and stared into her wallet. Please, Lore, it's on the house. The teenager closed the register. How long you been back? Gio asked. It wasn't that she died. People died every day. It was how she died and that everyone knew. More people came to the funeral than should have. People she hadn't seen in decades. People she wasn't close to. They whispered during it. They wanted to see, but there wasn't anything left you could put in a casket. Loretta turned slowly, then walked outside. She sat sweating on the curb as her mother's narrow face hovered over the parking lot like a hologram. Its pearly eyes bore down on her. It was sucking up all her power. Loretta got quickly up and felt woozy. She staggered into her car and started the engine. She couldn't catch her breath. The song on the radio was an old one she knew. She turned it way up. As she pulled away from the curb, she could see the boys running to the door. She felt like a claw rising out of the earth. She sped off. I'm going to stop it there. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you for coming out. I'm going to read a short scene from the new novel. It's all about conspiracy theories and fake news, which is odd because when I wrote the scene, fake news wasn't really a term. And I guess the Russians are ahead of us in that department. So it'll be helpful when you listen to it to imagine me as a 60-year-old man. The narrator of this scene is a man named Julian Brink. He's a Russian immigrant like me, but he came in his 30s, but now he's 60, and he's traveling to Moscow because he's working for an oil company, an American oil company that's doing Arctic drilling as a joint venture with a Russian state-sponsored oil company. It's basically Lukoil. And and so he's at his first business banquet with his like Russian partners. And the Russian boss is this guy named Kablukov, and Kabluk means boot in Russian, so his nickname is the Boot. Okay. Now that Kablukov and I have done the ritual flogging of each other with birch twigs, he treats me as affectionately as a brother. This is Banya reference, in case you're confused. How have you been? He says at the banquet table and pours a neat 30 grams into my shot glass, right up to the top. Very fine, Ivan Matveevich, and you? I'd be better off without those two buzzing in my ear. And how is your lovely lady friend, I ask him now. What's her name? The last time I saw Kablukov in Helsinki, he showed up with some blonde in boots. You would have thought he had brought her along to show her off, except he did nothing but complain about her the entire time. This heifer won't leave me alone until I buy her 2 suitcases of fur. Like we don't have our own fur in Russia. Where the hell does she think the Finns get theirs? My wife's got a rule, he tells me now. She doesn't care who the heifer is, as long as I drop her after 3 months. And every 3 months, a new heifer? I say. No, I didn't say that. You have to listen. 3 months is the limit. I can see it's important to Kablukov that I understand this rule properly. He's a family man, after all. Anyway, he says, there are more interesting things in life. And what has the Boot discovered to be more interesting than heifers? Horses, he tells me. You race them? What? No, I breed the fuckers. They can't do it alone? I can tell you're joking, Brink, but this is a serious business. The cardinal rule of horse breeding is no artificial insemination. Otherwise, your horse can't get a passport. Every sheik in the Saudi royals flies his mares to my boy on a private jet so he can give him a proper fuck. He's too valuable to race. The Arabs are nuts about their horses. It's part of their heritage, Arabian Nights and all that shit. Kablukov drops his voice to a murmur. I keep him in a secret stable. See, not here in Russia. I'm no idiot. Here he'd be assassinated on the spot. No, he's safe in England. Only 2 people know where that stable is, me and the stable keeper. For a moment, Kablukov's identification with his thoroughbred seems so complete, the thrill of his libertine existence, the risk of his assassination, that I wonder if it's not himself he's talking about. But even as I'm giving my full attention to the Boot, it's difficult to ignore the laughter coming from the other end of the table, where his deputy, Mukhov, our serial joker, has started telling a story about the new set of snapshots that have turned up in Abu Ghraib. But really, why all the hysterics and runny noses over a few photos, Mukhov says. We can get some good shots like that from our Chechen brothers in Chernokozovo. The point is this scandal. What is it really about? A myth? That your American soldiers fight with white gloves on. He looks straight at me and I prepare my face for what's to come. Your military, sadistic brigands, no better than our Spetsnaz. Your demokratia, imitation cheese democracy, just like Russia's. And your supposedly free press. Let's not even start on that charade. Well, guess what, he says, right on cue. It turns out everyone is exactly the same, only our State Department doesn't bother with the pretense of an annual report. And here we are again, dragged by the tide of alcohol into that vast epistemic gulf, where every lunatic proposition is self-evident, while universal truths are hauled in for questioning. A logic-free zone where I've been more than once cornered into admitting that Roosevelt did have advanced knowledge of Pearl Harbor or challenged to prove that smoking really causes cancer. Don't forget to mention how Neil Armstrong never set foot on the moon, I suggest, even though I vowed to stay silent this time. It was all a hoax pulled off in some Hollywood studio. He gives me a sidelong look, trying to gauge my sincerity, but it's another landing that's of interest to him. The moon I don't know about. What I'd rather find out is what happened to the other planes. Which planes would those be? Come on now, the 9/11 planes. There were 7 of them. I trade looks with my partners. I never heard of any 7. Wow, Mukhov looks around the table. They really don't report anything to you people over there, do they? And what's your theory? Who's talking about theories? You're an intelligent person. I'm only saying look at who benefits. And according to that logic, it was the Kremlin that bombed those apartment buildings and blamed it on the Chechens so you could re-enter your troops. Across our detente zone of empty shot glasses and platters, my boss senses just enough explosive potential that his arm begins to rise in a diffusing toast. But he has no chance to make one because Mukhov is beaming, not in fury, but with jubilation. Yasna Adela, he shouts. Of course we did it. He reaches out his arms as though to give my stubborn head a kiss, his face shining with the satisfied glow of a man who's gotten his point across at last. Thank you.
I'm just going to read from here. Am I too loud? No. I feel like this should be further away from me. Oh, gosh. It's revealed I just don't know what the alphabet is, actually. It's in alphabetical order. Here we are. I'd run out of options. That's how these things usually happen, how a person ends up placing all her last hopes on a stranger, hoping that whatever that stranger might do to her would be the thing she needed done to her. For so long, I had been a person who needed other people to do things to me, and for so long, no one had done the right thing to me, but already I'm getting ahead of myself. That's one of my problems, I'm told, getting ahead of myself. So I've been trying to find a way to get behind myself, to be slow and quiet with myself like Ed used to be. But of course I can't quite make it work. Can't be exactly who Ed was to me. There are some things that only other people can do to you. Pneuma adaptive kinesthesia, packing, what Ed does to people, requires one person to know and another person, me in this case, to lie there not knowing. In fact, I still do not know what pneuma adaptive kinesthesia really is, just that it made me, or seemed to have made me, well again. During our sessions, Ed sometimes hovered his hands over my body, chanting or humming or silent while he supposedly moved or rearranged or healed invisible parts of me. He put stones and crystals on my face, my legs, sometimes pressing or twisting some part of my body in painfully pleasurable ways, and though I didn't understand how any of this could remove the various sicknesses from my body, I couldn't argue with relief. I'd spent a year suffering from undiagnosable illnesses in almost every part of me, but after only one session with Ed, just 90 minutes during which he barely touched me, I could almost forget I was a body. Such a luxury it was to not be overwhelmed by decay. Chandra had suggested packing, called it feng shui for the energetic body, or guerrilla warfare against negative vibes. And though I was sometimes skeptical of Chandra's talk of vibes, this time I had to believe her. I'd been ill for so long that I'd almost lost the belief that I could be well again, and I was afraid of what might replace that belief if it disappeared completely. Technically, Chandra explained, packing is a form of neurophysio-chi body work, a relatively obscure technique either on the outskirts of the forefront or the outskirts of the outskirts, depending on who you ask. The problem was, as always, an invisible one. The problem was money. I needed a minimum of 35 packing sessions at $225 each to complete a packing series, which meant a complete treatment would cost me the same as a half year's rent on that poorly lit and irregularly shaped one bedroom I'd had for many years, not because it suited me, I detested it, but because everyone said it was a steal, too good to let go. And even though my paycheck from the travel agency was decent, the monthly credit card minimum, student loan payments, and last year's onslaught of medical bills were all reducing my bank account to cents or negatives each month, while the debt always seemed to grow. One dire morning, starving and cashless, I ate the last of my pantry for breakfast, slightly expired anchovies mixed into a tiny can of tomato paste, and I often Hare Krishna'd for dinner, leaving my shoes and dignity at the door to praise Krishna, the god, as far as I could tell, of cafeteria-grade vegetarian fare and manic chanting. By the fourth or fifth love feast, white tilaka greased on my brow, pasta wiggling around the metal plate as if independently animate, I knew that the boundless love of Krishna would never be enough for me, no matter how hungry or broke or confused I became. It was only a few days later that answering the ad for an income-generating experience tacked to a bulletin board at a health food store seemed like my only real option, that somehow giving away the dregs of my life might be the best way to get a real one back. I'll just stop there.
Okay, my first question, I know this is a series event and you're series writers, but I have my Entertainment Tonight Academy Award question, which is, how did you find out did you have any warning? Where were you? Was it an email? Was it a call? Did you fall to the ground screaming in relief? What was your first reaction when you found out, and how did you find out about being included in this collection?
I was like moving. My editor just sent me an email,
Uh-huh.
and I think my first reaction was just like I started guessing who the other writers might be, because I've been reading so many of these people's work for so many years, and like it was just, I think the biggest anticipation honestly was just getting to know the other writers, because we didn't know until it was publicly announced who everybody was.
Oh, that's exciting. So you were waiting for the same April kind of reveal as we were here. Anyone else? Does anyone else have any kind of like exciting discovery stories? Mark, your head's coming up.
I don't.
No.
I just got an email from my agent, and
Yeah.
should we need to use
Yeah.
the mics? Okay. Yeah, I was just walking around Union Square in New York. I think I was out to get lunch or come back from lunch, and I had this email from my agent, and it was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
Because like I'd known in the back of my, I think we all knew that we were like finalists, but it was a big finalist list, like
Gotcha.
big.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was pretty floored.
And now that
It's December.
in summer, and now that you know, was there a sense of, there must be joy and gratitude, but also is there a sense of pressure that you have this kind of mantle of responsibility to speak for the moment in literature? Yeah, or are you kind of putting that aside? What do you think, Katherine?
I do think like
Yeah, thanks.
that some of the people on the list are going to publish things, and in the comments section, people are going to be like, I can't believe this person was on that list. So I'm anticipating some of that.
I don't think there's really, I don't feel any weight with it. It's
You
just
don't.
like, oh, I get to keep doing this.
Right.
Like they'll let me do another. That's my overwhelming reaction, is they'll let me do another.
With the collection, I'm really interested in, you're all being honored for your work as novelists, and yet the representation is, of course, very short, that you, the representation of your work. How did you determine what you wanted to include? Was that the editors? Was that Sigrid? Was that you determining whether, because some, I think Katherine and Mark and Rachel, you all had pieces from a novel and work, right? Or Rachel, is yours a short story?
Yeah, mine's just
Right. It's and Jesse's is a short story.
I actually had an essay.
And exactly, Sana's is an essay. So how did you determine that was how you wanted to represent yourself?
Well, I mean, it was very prosaic, the logic, actually, because I think, we submitted work we had in progress, but
Gotcha.
my book came out just before this issue, so they just, and I had actually a piece of the book, but then like a week before, they're like, can you write something like new? So I wrote an essay in a couple of days, and that was my story, but it was fun, actually. It was like kind of athletic to do that.
And Jesse, was your story already completed, or was it something that you created for this?
It was already complete.
It was.
Yeah, I guess there were many things that could have been used for it,
Mhm.
and I felt, in a certain sense, it doesn't matter which thing,
Right.
because I feel like, I don't know, content of work is often largely arbitrary.
Mhm.
I think work shows a kind of a philosophy of life.
Right.
So whichever thing I had put in would be the same.
You would be there, right?
Yeah.
When I first read all 5 of your stories, I tried to do an exercise where I pretended that I was an alien. And these were the only 5 stories that I knew about that American writers were writing right now. And I tried to kind of think about what linked them all up. And to me, for myself, what I found in them all was loss. A kind of modern loss of health, of a relationship to nature, safety, and that was something that really permeated to me. And I was wondering, what do you think about this, and if that makes sense to you, and also if, building on that, are there any linkages or themes that you see keep manifesting in kind of your work together?
I mean, I think trying to assess some kind of linkage between all of us is like as if we were all lying in a bed and one of us is trying to make it at the same time.
Right,
so it's kind of hard to have that outside lens on yourself. But it's interesting that you say loss, because I just think that loss is probably like in every piece of fiction.
Right.
It's just
the
like
inversion is searching too, right?
Yeah. I mean, maybe there's some sort of American flavor of loss that we can't even really, you are an American, I'm
Right.
pretty sure.
Right.
So it's it's hard for us to say what's the connective tissue between us when we are the tissue,
Oh, absolutely. I was just wondering if
We should probably ask
Even-
like Granta or
Right,
we should
exactly.
ask like France
Right.
or something.
I was trying to think of an alien. I was just wondering if you read through the stories, if anything kind of jumped out at you that you saw. Oh, this is a preoccupation.
I feel like I'm kind of saying this as an outsider because I feel like my writing is probably like more on the traditional side of the spectrum because I had a fairly traditional novel. But what I really enjoyed about the collection as a reader was like the number of what you might call like speculative fiction. I don't know. I mean, it's hard to put labels on things, but I think there's a kind of like realism, naturalism, but also almost like a sci-fi element to some of the just the texture of the prose, which when one of the places we were reading with Mark, I saw there was a whole speculative fiction shelf, which I had never seen before because it was like a fairly new category that I was even like introduced to. But I don't know, maybe you guys are going to say like that sounds ridiculous, but I felt like I was really pleased with the fact that it was that they chose such unconventional, like experimental pieces and authors, which is great, because it's moving. In general, like there's a lot of commercial pressures on writers today. That
Right.
it was nice that they chose, such textured prose.
Kind of building on that, are there, sometimes there's a lot of negative news about books, or, about publishing today and saying, there's a lot of pressure, but are there things that you're super excited about or projects that are coming out or trends that you see in writing and in publishing? Are there things, presses or even just trends towards a certain sort of work that are exciting you, that are like knocking your socks off?
I was going to say that Twitter in general.
Oh,
has
interesting. What do you
been,
mean? Yeah.
Blowing my mind. A lot of the different things people are doing on there.
Do you mean like microfiction or?
I
just
think the way
expression?
it all gets mixed together, like the different kinds of art and jokes people are making, and the different way, the way I learn that something has happened in news or culture is often by seeing like a number of confusing jokes on Twitter. So that's been really fun.
And do you find that affects the way that you write fiction?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's recently I've been thinking about the sort of like varied experience, like moment to moment, and like what like a mismatch of stuff it is. And there's something about Twitter breaking that down too. Just the way things look in juxtaposition to each other. So I think I am trying right now to write things that are really, really like current and like don't necessarily like go together.
And Rachel mentioned, Jesse, you're on Twitter now as well. Is that right? How is that affecting the way that you write and the way that you communicate with other people?
Well, I don't look at it. I just send I do drawings on napkins.
Oh, okay.
I just send a photograph of the drawing
Right.
to Twitter. I don't think but I think in reference to your question about our joint concern, I think the industrialized world drifts in and out of a cloud of safety, and sometimes we feel this safety enormously, usually as some kind of the tale of the drift of wealth and well-being, and then other times it's just terror and fear. I remember in the 80s feeling like an atomic bomb was going to drop any day, and I think more and more over the last decades, it's become clear that the human race is some kind of an illness or a pollution that has overtaken the earth, and that it's just going to wreck everything. It's a kind of a destruction, and yet the reflexive nature of consciousness is so beautiful, and to be the one who perceives a rose or whatnot, it's glorious. So there we are, stuck in between these two poles.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, I totally understand what you're saying. I think that one other thing I wanted to say was it's very odd to have to rank creativity. I mean, that's a weird kind of conceit, right? A list of the best writers when people are especially.
Well, and Granta secretly ranked us all 1 to 21.
Did they?
Behind the scenes, and they won't show us.
Oh. Colleen Assange.
That's not true.
Okay. Well, it could be true. You don't know. Yeah. Right? I mean. Sounds pretty true. Yeah, it sounds pretty true. It is true. But I just wanted you all to speak to, I know that there's so many amazing writers doing things out there. And if there was anyone that wasn't on this list that really resonated for you that you wanted to kind of give a shout out to or make sure that our audience also knew about, that you thought, oh, why isn't... they did such a beautiful job, the editors and Sigrid, and just, collecting people. But if there was anyone else that you wanted to kind of advocate for.
I wish we would have seen Patty Yumi Cottrell, or is it Yummy Cottrell?
I think it's Yummy, but I don't know.
Yummy?
Yeah.
That's kind of more fun.
Reads, right? Yeah.
Patty Yummy Cottrell, she just published a book called Sorry to Disrupt the Peace. Mm-hmm. That's very... It is, I don't know, it has its own voice. It's bizarre. It's kind of related to fiction that's older, and it's just troubled in an interesting way to me. So
there's a writer, Mark Ladner, who I'm a big fan of. He's got a book of poetry that's really funny and exciting, and his book, I understand why he's not in this list at all, because his fiction hasn't been published yet in book form, but later this year his book's coming out from Tyrant Books. It's called Under the Sea, and I've read some of the stories, and there's a few of them are amazing.
Awesome, thanks.
A book, is it okay if I mention a Soho Press book?
It's wonderful, yes.
Okay, so I work my day
Yeah.
job as an editor, and a book that just came out this year that I love is Sonora by Hannah Asadi.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what I find remarkable about it, and what I think is more and more interesting and relevant, is finding characters who can somehow connect to our current global situation. And in this case, it's a pair of teenage girls, and the main character is, like the author, has one parent who's Israeli and one parent who's Palestinian American. She's in the Sonoran Desert. And there's this amazing kind of humming backdrop of magic and darkness and, almost magical stuff happening, but it's kept very light. Like the dial on it is turned so light. It's not quite like anything else I've read. And it's also in
I was going to say feminine unrest.
Feminine
in
unrest.
that book.
Yeah, and there's supernatural stuff and spaceships, and yet it's really just about two young girls in trouble making horrible decisions, which is one of my favorite types of books.
I love that one too.
Yeah. Just your Sana.
Sonora by Hannah Asadi.
I know we have copies in the store now. I've seen them.
It's in the store.
Yeah. Was there anything else just anything else that you wanted to call out that's moving you right now, or that you wanted people to know about?
I guess there are some. It's a list of novelists, but it can also be that one has written short stories or novellas or even nonfiction. Really, to me, it's all the same thing. But I think the least championed form in the United States is the novella, which is actually one of my favorite. So if there's a general change that I would like to see in publishing, it would just be that there's many more novellas.
Right.
How many novels would you like to have end earlier?
Many. And also it's so widely accepted in Latin America too, and less so here. Yeah.
I feel like this is one of those questions like, which band do you listen to? And if you want to be really cool, you have to pick one that's
just
like
pick something
only
speaking to your
5 people
heart.
have heard of. So I'm gonna name somebody who hasn't been published in the States yet, but I think she will be in a year or two. So I was just a moderator for this panel of Russian authors, and there's this young woman named Yelena Kostyuchenko. And speaking of work that is entirely realistic and feels like complete science fiction, she's a journalist for the Novaya Gazeta in Moscow, and her stories are like, I've never read anyone writing about Russia like this. Like, she'll have these really post-apocalyptic landscapes, and like where women will put their babies in these, they're called windows to life. They're like glass boxes on the sides of buildings that if you can't take, and then in 30 seconds the door closes and then you can never open it again, and then like the light starts shining inside the building so people come, and then like if there's no bodily harm, there's like all the history is erased from, and it's all these really weird situations that feel like one of my favorite writers from way back when is Varlam Shalamov, right? And his stories were about like Russian life, but they really read like science fiction, and she's sort of like bringing that back. So she's gotten an agent now, so I think it'll be a while, and you guys are going to hear of her. She's amazing, Yelena Kostyuchenko.
Awesome, thank you. I'd like to invite people up to ask questions, and while you formulate your questions, and the audience mic is right here. We have to do another, just really quick, going down the line as far as what you're working on now, and if the piece in the collection that people will be buying, if that's something that's going to be expanded, or just what you're working on now. Katherine, that's pretty easy. Katherine.
Mine's done.
Yeah.
And it's for sale here, curiously.
It's called The Answers.
It's called The Answers. I just read it was kind of the beginning. I skipped the beginning. I don't know. It's a novel. I don't know if you're interested in reading a novel. It's one of them. But
you should have that as a blurb. Yeah.
I'm gonna actually file that away.
Yeah.
Next time I ask for a blurb, that is what I'm giving out.
Awesome.
So that's all I'll say about it.
Rachel, what you working on?
I'm working on a novel unrelated to the story that was in there.
Katherine, did I understand your novel isn't out yet?
No, it's out.
It's out yet? It is.
Sort of. It's out in 2 weeks. But
It's out at Politics and Prose Bookstore.
So the only place on
In the world.
planet you can get this book right now is right here?
Yes, that's
Is
right.
that what you're-
Yeah, thank you, FSG.
These people would be crazy
Yeah.
not to buy it. They could probably resell them on
Should start a
eBay for
bidding
like
war right now.
$100. Yeah.
Always the editor.
Get 'em. You can resell these on eBay for $100.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, don't do anything to lower the resale price. I am working, that's from my next book, and it's about the end of the world and internet humor.
I have a novel coming out next year, which is called Census, and then a few years after that, another one that's also finished, which is called Diver's Game. And there's some other books that are finished that are just waiting. It just takes... If you publish too often, it's problematic, so you have to wait.
My recently released novel should be available here. It's called The Patriots.
It is indeed.
Great. And it's about an American woman who leaves the United States during the Great Depression and immigrants to Russia, and then kind of the resonance of that choice and her descendants. So it takes place in 2008 and 1930s and all through the Cold War. But it's really exciting. There's a lot of plot. So if you guys love plot, come and buy it and I'll sign it.
Awesome. Do you have any questions from the audience? Anyone? There's a microphone right here.
I would actually love for you all to talk about plot a bit. It can be, I've found, a dirty word with some novelists, and some people hang all their work on it. I'd love to hear about your relationships to plot.
My first book had no plot, as far as I'm aware. Or I was told this anyway. I thought it had just enough, but it didn't have any.
That's not
and
true,
then,
no.
sorry?
It had some plot. It had a
Similar
trajectory.
things must have happened, but maybe not in an order that
Right.
was, displayed
Plotty.
any intelligence of
No.
plot at all. But I guess the second one sort of has some plot, and then I guess I only think this because my agent said, "Oh my God, you wrote a book with plot," and I was like, "Is that so?" So I don't think it's very important at all. I think what's more important when I'm reading as a reader, if I like listening to the voice that's speaking to me, then I just continue to read it, whether they're kind of piddling around doing nothing or whether they're like, chasing the bad guy down the alley. It doesn't matter to me as long as the sentences are interesting.
When I wrote short stories in the past, they were more like situation based. And then when I was writing my first novel, I began to like sort of buy into some of the stuff about plot that I had sort of ignored, just because I was trying to hold people's interests longer. And then I started writing screenplays, and then I started like really buying into some plot stuff. Because I was
Screenplays will do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm trying to like get people to agree with my screenplay. But then I started writing fiction again, and having a lot of fun without plot, and then thinking, oh no, there's no plot, but then thinking of a lot of my favorite books, which are pretty light on plot. So I think style and good sentences and bizarre situations can get you really far without it.
My first book and then the one that I'm working on now are both composed of they're kind of crazy monologues, fragmentary monologues that are quite modular, and the way they're arranged in the book can be moved around a lot. So I have a little bit of a different relationship to plot than some writers do, in that it kind of becomes a question of almost like mathematically what is, how do I arrange them in the strongest way, and then once that's strongest, then how do I sort of weave some of the threads together? I would say if you want to plot, buy Katherine's book 2 weeks before it's available anywhere else and sell it on eBay for $100. You've made yourself like $75.
But wait, go back to, so when you're saying modular, what is your writing process for that then? Do you write them, like each dialogue must have something though that you want to achieve in it, right? Something that you want to express. How do you put them all together? What is the process of that?
Well, I think that emerges
Or
from the
just
writing.
throw it up and,
And I think that how it ultimately fits in the book emerges from then the process of sort of putting it together and moving it around. And I mean, I've been talking to my editor of the next book, and I think, one of the things that he was saying is just suggesting ways to, bring a little more, like bring the sort of threads of unity together, bring up some things, bring down some things, which I'm very sympathetic to, and I like getting that kind of advice.
Is that because you're an editor?
Yeah, I mean, I respect the process.
Yeah.
Respect your editor.
I have a plot that was purchased for me in 1997. It's by my mother. It's in a cemetery in Long Island. I don't know if that's exactly where I'm going to end up, but I own it at this point, at any rate. As for literary plot, I think, to a certain extent, I guess there's a consensus understanding of sort of a classical arc to a story or to plot. So then anytime an element of a story is invoked, it seems to leave this trail ahead of itself. And then the writer, in writing towards that or away from that, flirts with that plot. And that anticipation creates energy or delight for the reader. I think with my texts, usually I have some basic understanding of a structure that I'm going to work with. And then I want to be surprised as I write it, at the ways in which it departs from that. So that's the way that I handle plot. But I think, in a way, it's kind of a farce because, like a text, it's not, a book that is about a person who starts a school of baking and is, baking babies into cakes or something. It isn't. Babies are not actually baked into the cakes. It's just words on a page, So I think, to a certain extent, that the book can be about anything. Really, it doesn't need. Plot is not important, provided that the mind of the writer somehow is given as a gift to the reader. And then the real underlying thing is just that the reader can encounter the company of another human being. You know. So to me, plot is sometimes useful but facile.
So my husband is also a sort of writer. He writes podcasts for radio, and I think helping him work on podcasts has changed the way I think about story. I think the reason the plot is such a dirty sounding word is that it's so external, when a real story is all about some internal shift of perception, kind of when our whether the scale of our perception changes, or whether we kind of come into awareness of some misunderstanding of the world or of ourselves. So I think maybe I think like something happened with me when I was 35, and I just kind of came out of the closet. I enjoy structure as a writer. I just enjoy doing it, but it's not really just hooking the reader. It's about kind of creating a tension in the prose, and there's so many different ways to create it. Because as a reader, like I just finished reread Nausgard, which people would say has no plot, but to me it actually has a lot, because it has a lot of tension that's replicating the tension of everyday life, right? So somehow that's being achieved. So I don't know. I guess it becomes kind of a label, what you want to call it, but you can achieve that tension through kind of giving your reader an emotionally intelligent experience through voice or through story. There's just so many ways to do it, but to me that's always kind of the end, to create a sense of tension in the prose.
So when you came out of the closet as a structure lover, did that change the way you worked, or that you wrote longer pieces,
I think
that you approached the writing?
Because I think I was doing it unconsciously anyway, but there were sort of turns in the work, whether or not I wanted them. But then when I was more aware of what it was that I was doing, I felt like I could have more control over it myself.
So do you outline more? Do you know? How does that actually manifest on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah,
I write the text.
Well, I write by hand a lot, and this novel that came out, I started writing when my son was born, and I had to I couldn't sit in the same place all day long, so I started writing on index cards, and then I would just tape them together to have something physical, almost like that Kerouacian, a reel of toilet paper, sort of. But somehow just having something physical allowed me to have a more visual relationship to the story.
Right.
Maybe that's what.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Do we have a question there? Hi.
So the question is a little self-serving, but I'm curious to know how you're all young writers, and when you first started out, I'm curious, how did you negotiate putting yourself out there? And you always hear you should expect rejection as a writer. You should, if you're not getting rejected 90% of the time, you're not doing it right, is something I've heard, or maybe said to myself just to make myself feel better. But how do you negotiate that with actually sort of keeping sort of your belief in yourself or your craft or what you're doing, and sort of when do you compromise that with the feedback you're getting out there? Just curious.
Go. Well, I think the putting yourself out there thing is can be really nerve-wracking, and it stops a person from writing something that's any good, because you're thinking about the way that it's going to be perceived before you even finish writing it. And I tended to not want to share things that I was working on for a really long time, and then eventually I started to realize that I only would write things that would get accepted anywhere if I was nervous as hell and I felt like it was too much. I felt like this character is kind of too much and embarrasses me. And then once I was writing those characters where I felt like there was something that threatened maybe the good favor that I felt like I had with other people, then the rejections were less, and then but then you go through the second thing of well, now it's going to come out, and are people going to think that you are as crazy as your characters are? Mm-hmm. And yes, they will. And then also you just have to stop caring, and I feel like the less and less I care, the better work I can make. And so then it's just there's less rejections. There's still rejections of all sorts, My agent sends out stories that I think, oh, this is a great story, and it's just no. But I don't care as much because I've kind of gotten through that initial push of writing this uncomfortable, like, tender thing that means so much to me that just putting it out there, I'm already, like, relieved of that tension. So
I got really into sending out my work. A teacher encouraged me to when I was in undergrad, and that helped to start doing it young. But I didn't think about it. Like, I wasn't thinking. I started thinking about any time you submit a story or a poem or anything, you're getting a reader, even if you just get them for a few lines. So I was interested that I had strangers reading my new story. So that was a useful way to think about it. And in terms of encouraging yourself, I think it depends on the writer, but I think it's really important. And I'll write something and think it's really good and exciting. And when I do that now, I have to write about how I think it's good and exciting, because then when I read it like a few days later, I'm not going to feel as good. And then when I do the line edits like 2 days after that, and by the end of the week, I'm going to sort of hate it. So I think it's good to sort of commemorate your early feelings. Anytime you feel, like when I read my own work, I print out all my drafts and I like read it with a pen, and it's like if I was reading the work of a friend. I underline the lines that I like. So anytime I'm having like a positive feeling, I like make some mark. And I think I've just gotten really used to like being a supportive like friend to yourself, and like in a notebook like writing down some of the good feelings. And then sometimes when I'm feeling bad, not necessarily writing that down. Because there's this one time I was rereading a draft of my novel and thinking like, oh, this is pretty good. And then I saw like an earlier note that was like me doubting it, and it sort of like brought me down. So yeah, being a good reader to yourself, I think, helps.
That's great advice. Anyone else want to chime in? You don't have to.
Well,
Sana.
I'll just say, for me, it's not the rejection part. It's about everything I've written is pretty much based on people I know. So, like, in the beginning, that was really hard because there was a story, and it was, I kind of wrote it really fast after a difficult period. I didn't think it'd get published, but then it got published, like, in a fairly prominent magazine. And it was about my aunt. Who was like, she was like a second mom to me, but like, what? So my mom was like, you gotta tell her it's coming out because people are gonna read it and they're gonna know. And so I did, like I called her before, and I was like ripping my hair out. And so then people read it, and her friends were like, can you believe she made you out to be such a Wolverine? And she was so cool about it. She said, my relationship with my relationship with Sana is my relationship with Sana, and her relationship with her characters is her relationship with her characters. And like, I think like I like lost my virginity with that.
That's
and
amazing.
after that, I was like, hey, I'll just write about who. Yeah. So
That's brilliant.
we'll
Good
forgive you.
aunt. Yeah. We have time for one more question. Hi.
Hi, this is just a question for the whole panel, really. So obviously, Granta, I think it's tremendously reassuring that Granta has been running its best of editions for over 3 decades now with British and now American writers. And obviously it's really heartening to see kind of just how much it still matters and how important it is for discovering new writing. But I just wanted to ask, in 2017, both as a reader and in your experiences as novelists and writers, where should we be looking to discover new writing now? Where should we be going to find sort of the writing that's really exciting? If I want to say to my friends, I've found this incredible author, before they're cool, where should I be looking?
Soho Press, where Mark Doten edits. I mean, no, actually, like, I do think small presses, like, there's a lot, they're kind of unbound by the same constraints that some of the larger, I mean, I say this like I am published by, like, a big press, but, the smaller presses tend to be where a lot of interesting shit's going on. I think Jesse was going to say something.
I think in the library also. I think just looking backwards through the centuries, there's so many great things have been written, and actually The only reason they're not exciting to people now is because the context is abstruse or difficult to approach. But once you have the wherewithal to avail yourself of any of these books, I mean, there's thousands of years of books, and some handful of them are, extolled now, but they're great. And many of them, many of them actually wouldn't be published today. They're daring and inventive and strange, and, what do you think about that?
Well, I'm just reading that book that came out like a year ago that's about the publication history of Joyce, and it's really very heartening to read. Like, this is more for the last question, but you see what Joyce went through. Good God, I mean, it took him years and years to publish Dubliners. The publisher who first said they were going to do it, they then decided, well, we'll only do it if you take out this one story and make X, Y, Z other changes. He's like, no, you can't do it. Like, that publisher practically sued him. He, disparaged them in the press. They threatened to sue him. Like, the man had nothing but struggle and strife the whole of his career. And meanwhile, he's going blind, and he's got all these other problems, like money problems, like big time. Like, it did make me feel very grateful to have a book, like a publisher. I'm published by Grey Wolf Press, an independent press, and it was great to have a home. And yeah, for this question, I would say briefly that it is very diffuse right now. And there's not, I mean, your question is hard to answer because there isn't a short answer to it. Like, there's so much going on, and the centers, as in so many other things, like the centers haven't held. It's very, the action is very dispersed. So you have to do some work, but I mean, the real way to do it is kind of make, listen to what smart people whose advice you like about books like and what they're recommending, and kind of follow that trail of authors who you dig into, the people that they dig and are influenced by, and the people like that, and there's lots of great places to find. I mean, the writer Dennis Cooper has this amazing blog that he updates 4 or 5 times a week, full of writing recommendations for stuff from the past, for contemporary stuff, and that's kind of an amazing resource. But there's 100 things like that.
And I mean, here at Politics and Prose, we always have small press displays, and we have several booksellers that are absolutely devoted to reading them and refreshing them and making sure they're really vital. So
I was
right
actually,
here in this place,
before you cut me off, I was about to say, independent booksellers.
I just had to get it in there. I had to get it in there.
Independent booksellers are the #1 resource for learning about what the cool fiction is right now.
And with that, thank you very much to all of you. We're really grateful you're here.